December 1985 issue of Penthouse magazine, an article appeared called "The AIDS Cover-Up" by Dr. Gary Null. The conventional wisdom then, as now, is there is a virus that causes AIDS. Today that wisdom is still conventional, but less so. Less so because too many HIV or AIDS virus-infected people are living longer and are showing no signs of AIDS at all. And more cases of AIDS are cropping up where people with AIDS don't have the so-called AIDS virus. Some researchers now believe that they have evidence that HIV, the so-called AIDS virus, can be defeated in the bodies of some who have been exposed to it. In fact, some cases suggest that HIV is not deadly, says the Washington Times, and all exposed patients are not vulnerable. At Johns Hopkins, for example, 4 high-risk men who tested positive in 1986 now test negative for HIV. 27 men at the University of California who tested positive in 1985 tested negative in 1987. At San Francisco City Clinic, 36 men infected with the so-called AIDS virus for between 10 and 15 years have remained symptom-free and retain healthy immune systems. It's important to note that 23 of them never took AZT, the controversial treatment. Scientists like Dr. Peter Duesberg, who have been saying the HIV infection does not cause AIDS and is not a death sentence, are having their theory of cofactors, such as drugs as a contributing cause, taken more seriously. But in some ways, the Duesbergs of science are saying what Dr. Gary Null said years ago in Penthouse magazine. It's the condition of the body's defenses against disease, the immune system, that is most crucial in developing what we call AIDS and of surviving an HIV infection. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, AIDS and health.
Tony Brown's Journal is brought to you by Pepsi and its bottlers. This program is a part of Pepsi-Cola's continuing support of your community's cultural, educational, and business interests.
My first guest is Dr. Gary Null. Dr. Null has published over 50 books on health and nutrition, is a health and science reporter on television and radio, and host of The Gary Null Show, a nationally syndicated television program. His PhD is in human nutrition and public health science. Our next guest is a household name, a man all of us know and admire, Mr. Arthur Ashe. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and Mr. Ashe in particular, thank you, since you simply accompanied Dr. Null, and we, let's say, solicited your appearance here on this program. And thank you so much for being gracious enough to be with us, because I'm sure your personal experiences will add a great dimension to what we're going to talk about. But let me begin with you, Dr. Null. I'm just fascinated by this article that I referred to from December of 1985, at a time at which people weren't discussing any relationship of the health of the body, the ability of the body to defend itself, to what they then were calling AIDS. As a matter of fact, at that time, I think we were knee-deep in homosexual sex causes AIDS, and then the homosexuals go out and give it to everyone else, which we now know is not true from a number of studies. What about these statistics I cited in the opening? So many people now who were HIV positive who have now converted to HIV negative.
That is not a rare situation, Tony. For a number of years, there have been 2 schools of thought on AIDS. One is exactly what you said. You get the HIV virus, and you're going to get AIDS, and you'll die, depending upon the length of time, the latency period. And they keep raising this latency period. Another school of thought, one that I looked at both, and then I focused specifically on who's not getting AIDS. Well, first of all, 98% of the American population are not getting AIDS. So it's not an infectious disease as we've been led to believe it is. It still remained in the same subset of the population. It's not a gay disease. It's only to one specific small part, 2% of the gay population. Because after all, about 20% of the American population are gay. Thirdly, and most importantly, is that we've seen people with HIV infection who've led absolutely normal lives and will remain completely healthy unless, and here's the big unless they are convinced that they should be taking a very aggressive form of chemotherapy, such as AZT and DDI. Now, if those people have other risk factors, meaning if they've smoked, taken drugs at some point, malnourished, if they're not in good physical condition, if they're working in an exposed environment of environmental pollutants, then their immune system has already been compromised. In other words, they've been processing disease whether they had the HIV infection or not.
Now, your operative verb there was had.
Yes.
Not have.
Have.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. If one has the HIV infection,
Yes.
and they previously were exposed to these phenomena,
They're going to have a weakened immune system.
and if they are now presently doing it,
Yes, then the likelihood is they will manifest opportunistic disease.
I see.
But the drugs being used to treat the disease, we have found, will contribute what is called iatrogenesis, meaning drug-induced illness in a statistically very high percentage. And I'll give you an example. I brought a lot of scientific research that shows that even people, women who are treated for ovarian cancer using chemotherapy, end up with a very high percentage of leukemia. And yet that's not told, and that's part of the statistics. In fact, chemotherapy for all major cancers, I mean all major cancers, are on the increase, 100% in prostate cancer in the last 10 years alone, as well as breast cancer, colorectal cancer. People have been getting chemotherapy for major cancers. Someone finally got around to saying, hey, let's look at the evidence. They looked at the evidence. They were not improving morbidity or mortality. In other words, they weren't improving the quality of life or the length of life. And yet it continues to be used. Same thing with AZT. It continues to be used. I'm not suggesting people not use AZT. I'm suggesting look at the people who are not only surviving what we call AIDS, but thriving. I've seen over 1,200 people who are in various study programs or participating in New York and HEAL, which is a group that is an acronym for helping people with AIDS, and other health support groups who have changed their diet, radically so. In other words, it's more of a vegetarian diet with a lot of fresh juices and enzyme-rich foods and salads and sprouts, home-cooked foods, lots of special antioxidant nutrients like vitamin C and vitamin E and selenium. Intravenous use of glutathione, which is tremendous for the body's immune system. It itself, glutathione, will reverse transcriptase inhibition, stop it. In other words, the replication of the AIDS virus, or what we're calling the AIDS virus, it stops it. And glycyrrhizin, which is a licorice extract that they get intravenous, it stops the replication. Vitamin C, it stops the replication of this so-called AIDS virus. And in fact, I went out to the Linus Pauling Institute and I spoke with the Dr. Jirwala, who's the head of the virology department. And he showed me all these HIV cultures, and he said, we're able to kill these HIV cultures with vitamin C at high doses. I'm not talking about 30 milligrams or 60 milligrams or what maybe even 100 milligrams. I'm talking about 50, 75, 100,000 milligrams of vitamin C have taken people out of all the risk factors. For instance, just a few years ago, the #1 reason people died of AIDS was pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, what is considered by some a parasite in the lung that causes the lungs, simply a person not to be able to breathe. Well, when you have 56% of the people dying, and then along comes a doctor, Dr. Robert Cathcart, who is the leading user of vitamin C as a therapy in America. He was also the creator of the hip prosthesis.
For cancer.
Yes, and he gives 75 to 100, 125,000 milligrams of vitamin C.
I was going to say, when we get to this level, you are recommending that people be under medical supervision.
Well, they couldn't do it unless they were under medical supervision, because they have to have
intravenous.
Checked.
They just can't go out and take tablets.
No, they can't. That's impossible. They'd end up with enormous gas at 5,000 milligrams. But he monitors them. Well, guess what? He has had zero, I'm talking about zero death from pneumocystis. In fact, pneumocystis is not a condition of a problem when he's treating his patients with vitamin C.
You said earlier, Dr. Null, that this was a treatment for AIDS. You mean this is a treatment for HIV infection, not for AIDS?
HIV infection.
Because when you get AIDS, that's not going to be applicable.
Oh, it does. It is. Oh, absolutely. I've seen people with advanced AIDS. I saw a young man in a hospital who had one lung completely gone, half of the other lung. He was on a respirator. He was cachexic, wasting away. He had lost almost 1/4 of his entire body weight. He was dying. In fact, very cruelly, 2 of his doctors had talked about him not lasting another week or 2. In front of him, they were talking at the bed like he didn't count. He was conscious. He was hearing them talk about him dying. He had parasites. His liver was malfunctioning. His kidneys were malfunctioning. His brother-in-law, who watched your program, got him out of that hospital, took him to a private center in New Jersey. He was given intravenous vitamin treatment. He was given massive, and we're not talking about you can do it yourself. I'm not talking about self-medicating. These were trained physicians, traditional physicians, but using these modalities. The other modalities hadn't worked. I don't care what works. Whatever works, use it. But if one thing is not working, then you've got to pay attention to the fact your patient's dying. People are more interested in the protocol than the patient. And so they started treating him. When I was called in to ask for some advice by these physicians, I suggested that he look at the intravenous use of hydrogen peroxide, as well as getting rid of the parasites, building up the immune system, using every natural technique. And they said, what proof do you have that herbs work? I have 100 herbs that have been shown to have super building of the immune system, and at least 19 of those will stop reverse transcriptase replication of the HIV virus, including shiitake mushrooms, astragalus, the herb, echinacea, the herb. You have reishi mushroom, and on and on. And this is not folk medicine. This is in the scientific literature. In fact, at one conference I had on AIDS, I had 100 patients who had gone from advanced AIDS, ARC, pneumocystis. People had purple lesions. One man had lesions so bad they were up over his teeth. He couldn't chew. Completely clear. Took a blood chemistry. Blood chemistry, completely normal. I'm talking about raising white cell count or a T cell count by almost 400 in a period of a month and a half to 2 months using natural treatment. Now, I did not suggest they go off anything like Bactrim or anything they might need if they had a recurrence. You use what works, but you don't exclude all these other things that have been shown to work. I took 23,000 scientific articles, 23,000 scientific abstracts. I set them out there. I said, now for the naysayers, for the physicians or journalists who are not aware that there's good science in this country that supports this, then here are the studies. There was over 117 just on cancer alone, and how vitamin C by itself will help either the prevention or treatment of virtually every kind of cancer. I then had the medical records of these patients. I had the patients and I had their doctors. No one in the media covered it. No one. I don't understand why, Tony. I don't understand why you cover it and these other people are afraid to cover it. Now, on the one hand, they'll say, well, there's no proof. There are no HIV positive, sero-HIV negative. Oh, no? What about the one that we took to Washington to introduce him to a senator to show that a man with ozone treatment, over 65 sessions of ozone into the body, putting him on a sugar-free diet to get rid of the candida, massive use of certain vitamins, all under medical doctor's care, of course, that man today is seronegative. Now, the medical record is there. The patient is there. This was not a person who was just HIV positive. He had AIDS. And yet, you know what the comments was? This will kill you. The guy says, look at the, look all this, says, well, it's obvious, he's so healthy, his chemistry is normal, he must never have had AIDS.
Right.
Well, good. If he didn't have AIDS, then he's got a malpractice suit for having been given all this drugs in all these hospitals for the last, year.
Well, let's talk about drugs for a minute, because I want to bring in our distinguished celebrity here. Arthur, you have AIDS, and you got AIDS from a blood transfusion. And you are being treated with AZT
and DDI
and DDI
and some other things.
Chemical, is the chemical therapy?
Yes, but I also, as I did with my heart disease, started to read as much as I could, and I also, I think, have an appropriate regimen of vitamins and other therapies as well. So it's not just AZT and DDI.
Now, how long have you been diagnosed with AIDS? How long have you known you had
My
AIDS?
opportunistic infection was toxoplasmosis, a parasitic infection in the brain, September '88. And obviously at the time, the thinking was that once diagnosed with AIDS, 90% of people like that don't live for 3 years. But of course, I'm 4 years, and as you can see, I'm feeling pretty good.
Now, were you ever tested a seropositive HIV infection?
Oh yes, yes. Yes, there was an HIV positive test for the blood. Yes.
Now, what you and Arthur have become friends, I assume, professional friends.
I have a lot of respect for him. I hope he has the same for me. We're trying to work on establishing what would be hopefully a protocol that he would find reasonable and doable. It is at the stage where we're looking at all the evidence to see what might be applicable that he could introduce.
All right, now, I'm not going to ask you to treat him, but I am going to ask you to help me develop a protocol for people similar in similar conditions.
All right.
I was very taken when Magic Johnson made his unfortunate announcement, and in this announcement he said that he had been diagnosed, had clinical tests conclusively proving that he had an HIV infection, but he did not have AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
The next report, and I have no way to verify this, just as in the media, that he then was being treated with AZT.
I would be adamantly opposed to that. Let me explain why. And this is just common sense. A person does not have to be a scientist to appreciate this. If a person goes to get a polio vaccine, all right, or a measles vaccine or PTP vaccine, they're doing so to get a part of that molecule into their body so their body can create an antibody to it. In other words, it has a defense against it. Then at some time in the future, if you come into contact with that, your body will say, aha, I recognize you, and they'll fight it. So when you test for the HIV virus, we're not testing for the virus. We're testing for the antibody. Now, granted, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, and I don't pretend to know everything about this, but I am confused about something, Tony. How is it that an antibody test for HIV seems to say you're going to get the disease and you must be treated vigorously, and yet an antibody test for polio, smallpox, measles, or anything else means you're protective? Now, that tells me that something is wrong with science. That's immunology upside down, that's virology upside down, that's preventive medicine upside down.
That's religion. That's not science.
Well, what it's telling me is that...
It's asking you to believe, not asking you to understand.
So I don't understand it.
But Gary, isn't the thinking there with reports that talk about aggressive admission or intervention with AZT when someone is HIV positive but not in the ARC or AIDS stage, that AZT or something like that may keep the virus from replicating and thereby lengthen the length of time that someone may survive with it? That's the theory.
You're right, that's the theory, but here's the theory also. They thought that it was a good idea in 1977, because I challenged it on my radio show, that women who had history of breast cancer in the family should have preventative radical mastectomy on their young daughters. Completely normal, healthy children whose mother had a breast cancer, the daughter should have their breasts removed.
Just very aggressive treatment.
Very aggressive treatment. Now, could you imagine growing up without breast because your mother had breast cancer? Because
you had no symptoms of it.
Yes, no symptoms. I'm suggesting that if you have a cancer cell, and there's not a person in this audience, there's not a person on this earth that you cannot find a cancer cell in their body. We create them and we kill them constantly. Does that mean that if we test for cancer cells and we find it, we then give people aggressive chemotherapy? You would create cancer that way. You would knock out a person's immune system. You see, we don't have the right model for medicine. Instead of honoring that the body has a lot of self-recuperative and self-healing power, if you feed it what it needs, if you feed the immune system, we in turn go against the immune system. We create cytotoxic drugs that depress it. We want to kill as many cancer cells or AIDS cells before we kill the body.
Well, let's
now,
help.
Has it worked with cancer? The very same people who are giving us this model for treatment of AIDS have controlled the war on cancer. This year, 520,000 Americans died of cancer. All right? We have 1.16 million new cases of cancer. We know pretty much what can cause cancer in 80% of the cases. It's environmental, including diet. There's no major program underway now to help prevent it on an environmental or dietary level, even though we know this. Instead, we have the same people who are telling us that cancer is a virus. We have wasted millions of lives, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, in this false pursuit that it's a single virus, a single cause. I don't know how people can any longer trust that a single cause is the heart disease, a single cause is cancer, a single cause is AIDS. Let's look at the multifactorial. Let's look at those people, and by the way, with hemophiliacs who have HIV and who do not have HIV both live the same length of time. So this idea that the drugs help them is nonsense. And I've looked at the studies on AZT and DDI. I cannot see where they have been shown to increase mortality, lifespan. I have seen a very high incidence of death and destruction. Now, that's not suggesting it's
Well,
going
let me ask you
to
this.
hurt everyone.
Let me ask you this question. No one else has, and perhaps you do because you're a very learned person. No one else I can find, and I write science writers, when I read in a newspaper, the HIV, comma, the AIDS that causes virus, comma, as an apposition. I then write
That has never been proven.
It is,
Tony,
there has never
show me
been
an
a
article.
no,
Show me an article. There is no article.
No,
now, I don't do what the other journalists do, Tony. All right? I'm not the New York Times. I work for a living.
No,
all right?
no publication.
I won't accept dogma.
One writer responded to me to tell me that the evidence that the HIV infection causes virus is true because a doctor at the Amsterdam conference said so. Now, he writes to millions of people every day telling them that the HIV infection, so-called virus, causes AIDS, but he has absolutely no evidence of it and has never, ever thought about it, and the federal government has never done trials or studies, have they?
No.
To identify.
If you go to the literature, you'll find something different than what we're being told. I went to the literature, Tony. I looked at all the scientific literature. I cannot find where HIV by itself causes any major disease whatsoever. Now, if something can't cause a disease by itself, and it's a very weak retrovirus, and it's not in a high percentage of the people who are dying of AIDS, and even when it does infect white blood cells, it generally only infects 10 to 100,000, that's not enough to cause a major disease.
Right, now I want to ask you this because
it does not even meet Koch's postulates, and how is it causing 24 different diseases? Now, if you say, is it a weak cofactor, I'll say fine, make it a weak cofactor. But don't make it the cause of a disease, because all we're doing is protecting Margaret Heckler's backside when she pronounced this is the cause of AIDS. It went from being a belief to dogma set in stone. That was wrong. That's bad science.
All right, before we leave, because I want to help clear this up, AZT is a chemotherapy, and Mr. Ashe and many other people with AIDS are taking it. Does AZT not stop DNA synthesis?
Yes, it does.
Now, would you help the audience understand what DNA synthesis is and what AZT does?
AZT and its analogs are chemotherapy. They will destroy the ability of this virus from replicating, producing itself. That's fine. I have nothing against that. But I'm suggesting we have other things that do it naturally. For instance, glutathione does it. That's even been found by the National Institutes of Infection and Allergy.
But what, in addition to
that's
destroying,
non-toxic.
in addition to destroying,
and that's not patented.
In addition to destroying the alleged AIDS virus, what else does AZT do to the body?
It depresses bone marrow.
Doesn't it destroy healthy blood cells?
It destroys all cells. It's not. It's a broad spectrum. It's not going to allow healthy cells, including the functioning of your liver. We found that when you do a nutritional evaluation on people taking AZT, every single person that I've seen tested has multiple nutritional deficiencies, the very nutrients they need for a healthy immune system, including the health of the thymus gland, which produces T cells, zinc.
$64,000 question. Would Arthur Ashe be better off, in your opinion? You're not a doctor, you're not alleging to be, and you're not treating him. In your opinion, would he be better off not taking AZT and simply using the natural means that you have outlined here to build his immune system?
A 1,000,000%. I would say that unequivocally, because AZT does not build the immune system. It depresses it severely. In fact, it's one of the most lethal drugs to the immune system. Now, if there was a need for any specific form of antibiotic or drug to intercede in any particular pathogenesis in the body, disease process, I would suggest in a second, take it. But I'm also suggesting that you need more than a casual nutrient intake. Just taking a vitamin pill won't do it. Your body, when it's depressed, you need to bring it up to a very high level. And that's what medicine has been refusing for a long time to do. They still think of nutrition as the RDA, you know, taking a tiny little bit of a nutrient that's all your body requires. Well, why is it that when we give people who have cancer, hepatitis, mononucleosis, why is it when we give them vitamin C, and I'm talking about levels of 50,000, 75,000, they still don't even pass in their urine? That means the body is using it. So you can imagine someone saying, well, here's 100 milligrams of vitamin C, and you think, oh, good, I'm getting my vitamins. That's not enough. We need to do both. I'm not suggesting that we should use one versus the other. I'm suggesting there is room and should be for both to be used. But certainly when nutrition comes along, it should be used aggressively based upon good blood chemistry. Look, when was the last time any doctor you know in any hospital in the United States did a viral titer for all the virals?
Now, are you suggesting that one used chemotherapy, AZT, and use your...
They should have the
form?
option of using both, but one should
What do
not.
you think they should do? Do you think one can survive AZT?
Think, Tony, I could bring in 1,200 people into the studio who have not had AZT and who are alive and well, who have completely normal immune systems. In fact, because they've given up a bad lifestyle or a depressing lifestyle, they are healthier than they've ever been in their life. In fact, their blood chemistry is as normal as anyone in this audience could be.
Sorry, we're out of time. I'm awfully sorry. I would like to have you back. Could you come back with us?
Sure, sure.
I'd like to have you back on a program where we can focus on you, because you've got a phenomenal experience that we should share. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us.
Thank you.